Madam President, distinguished guests, each one of you, I give you my greetings. And it is an honor to be able to be invited, and I would like to thank Kalervo, that's how I call him, so allow me this formality. Thank you for this opportunity to come and to speak about religious freedom. But I have to apologize to him because if you allow me this very informal approach, he has been persecuting me literally to bring my flute to play here. And I resisted, and I think I used my freedom for that. So I just told him that I'm not very good at doing two things. When my mind is focused on something, I would like to do that, and maybe another time, so I will indulge eventually. So my apology. I hope you have not been offended by my declining that invitation. If you do, then I will have to pray for you. My apology for that too. I would like to just take a few brief minutes to talk about the pivotal position of freedom of religion or belief. Our global context presents us with a paradox. Human rights in general and freedom of religion or belief seem to benefit from a worldwide recognition and acceptance. That is a fact. However, the legitimacy of the language, discourse, and concept of human rights itself are increasingly contested. Certainly by totalitarian regimes, as one would expect, but also increasingly in academic and philosophical and political circles. Several scholars, contemporary thinkers, and politicians actually have written to deconstruct the very concept of human rights and its relevancy. Recent publications making a case against the universality of human rights have considerably increased. And that is understandable also. Why? Because scholars looking at the record of human cruelty against other human beings tend to basically put forward the thesis that humanity doesn't really believe in human rights, because how is it possible for human beings to treat other human beings with violence, cruelty, and so forth? Because of that, then, the very concept of human rights and of freedom of religion or belief is actually contested. But allow me to make a different case, though, actually insisting on the pivotal position on freedom of religion or belief. Actually, if I just very succinctly mention some definition, I would say that freedom of religion or belief, also called religious liberty, is essentially the freedom to live in accordance with one's conscience or belief. It is one of the fundamental principles behind the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, agreed upon December 10, 1948. And the context is really significant because the world has just experienced two world wars. The First World War ended with 16 million deaths. Right? And then nations decided maybe instead of waging wars, it would be time to build bridges to build peace, as a matter of fact. So the League of Nations was created then. But then, in spite of this mediation, the attempt to build bridges, still we had Second World War. And this time, not 16 million people died, but 60 million people died. Almost a whole generation sacrificed. Again, an attempt to bring nations together, to bring people groups together. So the United Nations was created. And actually, the United Nations was created based on 3 pillars, essentially. The first pillar, understandably, peace and security. The second pillar, justice and development. And then finally, the third pillar, human rights in terms of individual liberty, personal equality, and life in dignity. So, when nations agreed then to ratify the UDHR, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 18 was very explicit in putting forward the need for freedom of religion or belief. So it was then ratified, universally recognized. Of course, a few nations abstained actually from ratifying, but on the whole, most nations actually agreed. So interestingly then, the Article 18 reads as follows, and I quote, "Everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief, and freedom either alone or in community, with others or in public or private, to manifest his religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance." A friend of mine, Professor Heine Bielefeld, actually expanded and highlighted this notion by saying, I quote, "Human beings have the freedom to adopt or change a religion or belief, to persuade others by engaging in non-coercive missionary activities, to hold worship and or ceremonies either alone or with others, to abandon a religious community, to manifest their convictions in private or in public." And there are other expansions since it was first adopted. Maybe I should just mention here very briefly that international law very clearly ratified, agreed, expanded on this basic fundamental definition that one finds in Article 18. I could, of course, mention here the 9 core treaties or covenants from the UN, and here the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, again recognizing this right. Also, a very important historical document here, known now as the Helsinki Accords, also highlighted the importance of freedom of religion or belief. Interestingly, that was, of course, ratified in 1975 here in Helsinki. But let me move on also to not just at the international level, but most constitutions, including the Constitution of Finland, emphasize the importance, again, of freedom of religion or belief. Most of them, and I calculated about 132 countries explicitly mention this right. Now, why is this important? You see, when you take, for example, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, of course, one can point to the fact that Article 18 positioned religious freedom as a human right. Now, people focus most of the time on the right aspect, the legal, legislative aspect, but I would like to submit to your consideration that the human aspect is as important. Without this human aspect, in other words, if you allow me to say, it is really an anthropological issue, and even further, from a faith-based perspective, it is also a theological issue. What is a human being? See, so there is more to religious freedom than meets the eye. The true scope and nature of religious freedom transcends, as a matter of fact, local, national, regional boundaries. Its universality is part of its cornerstone principle. It is, after all, a human right. But it is not just a right. As I mentioned, the human aspect should not be lost out of sight. In essence, all human beings are entitled to their freedom of religion or belief. And what is at stake really is the fact that without this freedom, human beings live beneath their dignity as human beings. Yeah. Because what is it that makes a human person a human being? Maybe one of the definitions would be conscience, human conscience. Without this, what I will call an inner sanctum, something is missing in our experience as human beings. So, religious freedom can be compared actually to a multifaceted trajectory upstream and downstream. For example, it presupposes freedom of thought, freedom of conscience, freedom of choice, and freedom of expression. It has actually been designated accurately as a compound freedom in itself. And naturally, it translates, or it should translate into freedom of assembly, without which it would give the impression that it is only relegated to the private sphere. Freedom of religion or belief include, of course, the right to own property devoted to celebrating what one cherishes. So this freedom means also the right to use symbols and signs in time or space. It allows enactments of beliefs through rites and rituals, through commemorations of valued past event, or anticipations and expressions of hope for a better future. So in essence, if I would summarize, I would say religious freedom is the right to profess, to practice, to propagate one's beliefs without restriction or coercion. It is the inalienable prerogative to live according to the dictates of one's intimate, most intimate freedom, that is freedom of conscience. So, of course, religious freedom is regulated by the responsibility not to impinge upon other people's freedom, and more positively by the awareness of the infinite dignity and worth of other human beings. And this is why, actually, religious freedom or freedom of religion or belief, as it is called in the international community, it is actually an antidote against using people. Immanuel Kant famously say that human beings should not be used as means to an end. So they should not be instrumentalized. But why? Well, because of human dignity, he postulated. But from a faith-based perspective, there is actually another dimension as important that we may underline here. Human beings, from a faith-based perspective, are created in the image of God. Of course, for those who would believe, because not everybody believes that. But still, what it means is that humans actually intrinsically are people of worth, that they have intrinsic dignity, and because of conscience, humans are elevated to a level that no other creature actually or entity can be conceived of. Now, what this translates concretely is that human beings are sacred beings. And if there is probably one aspect that completely revolutionized, from a Christian perspective, the Greco-Roman world, it was this idea that human beings are actually more important than temples, more important than cathedrals, of course now, or mosques or shrines. Why? Because humans are created in the image of God. So people respect temples, mosques, shrines, cathedrals, and so forth. But human beings are actually positioned in a better place than places in that sense. So this is, and this is connected to a moral dimension, because conscience is the inner sanctuary, inner sanctum that expresses these dimension of morality within human being, like a site where we decide what's right and what is wrong. So this is the reason why if conscience is stifled, suppressed, or taken away, or dominated by another person, this is like a crime. It is actually sacrilegious. Sacrilegious in a sense of stealing what belongs to divinity in that sense. And humans are considered that important in this sense. So then we can say that religious freedom is really more than just the right to worship, like a day or a place. It is constitutive to what it means to be human in the first place. And this is really the reason why once religious freedom is restored, and I use purposefully the word restored, in a sense, think about the statistic. 76% of world population doesn't benefit from this freedom. 76%. And actually, to be specific, 5.5 billion now, over 5.5 billion of humanity is not celebrating, embracing actually, or benefiting from this freedom of religion or belief, either through government restrictions or through actually popular hostility. People groups refusing to other minorities and so forth the right to believe according to the dictates of their conscience. So then I can really say, and I will expand eventually during the question and answer period, but if religious freedom or freedom of religion or belief was respected, it would mean that people will be respected. And consider this thesis. If freedom of religion or belief was respected and protected for all, which is not the case, there would be no slavery. There would be no subjugation of other people. There would be no colonialism or imperialism. Why? Because people will be respected in their dignity. And we could add God-given dignity. The right to self-determination according to one's conscience would be the prerogative of every people group and of every individual, man and woman. So a tangible way to respect people is, in fact, to respect their conscience. Conscience is like an inner sanctuary I mentioned, a sanctum where decisions are made which express one's deep humanity and therefore identity. So religious liberty, by virtue of its interrelatedness, interdependency, and indivisibility with other fundamental freedom, is actually a compound freedom central to all other freedom. In Vienna, 1993, there was in Vienna, 1993, and then I conclude here, there was a covenant about that all rights, all human rights are interdependent, indivisible, actually, and they are interrelated. So we can say that about religious freedom. But if religious freedom is so unique, it is because it is actually connected also to the mystery of life. I mentioned about the conscience is one of the things. And because of that, human beings should not be coerced, forced, harmed, because they believe differently. And actually, for those who believe that God created humans in God's image, it's sacrilegious. It's like daring to introduce oneself in a relationship between divinity and humans where only God has the right to have access in people's conscience, but no other human beings, and probably whether we take the Reformation, the insistence on freedom, that a human person has no lord over him or her, I think it's extremely important that we work to restore the importance of human beings, the sacrality of human beings, and of course that can be done by respecting freedom of conscience, freedom of thought, or freedom of religion or belief. Thank you very much.